The World Health Organization has identified children's exposure to pervasive unhealthy food marketing as a major risk factor for childhood obesity. In South Africa, obesity is fast growing, with 1 in 8 children now living with it. Every day, children are exposed to unhealthy food marketing from where they live to where they learn and even play, but also during major sporting events like the World Cup and the Olympics. This can be seen on television, in and around their schools, where they play games online and also on social media. Researchers say marketing to children can have lifelong consequences as childhood eating habits and preferences persist into later life. Developmentally, children are extremely vulnerable to food marketing. They are highly impressionable, cannot recognize advertising intent, and lack knowledge of its nutritional value. And the WHO has called on countries to enact legislation to protect children from unhealthy food marketing in digital media as an emerging serious threat to children's health and right to privacy.
Research shows that during children's viewing hours, a lot of unhealthy food products are being advertised.
I guess, simply put, it's just advertising just responds to the economic spaces that are there.
It's a cop-out to say, you know, we're responding to the market. By that same logic, we are going to be able to openly sell cocaine.
We're looking at 4 in every 10 children who live below the food poverty line in households that don't have enough money to meet the dietary needs of their children.
With us, we have David from DG Murray Trust, Petronell from HEALA, Laurie from UCT, legal advisor Mikateko, and of course, Vincent, a brand marketing expert. Petronell, we're going to get right into you. Of course, you're part of HEALA. You've raised the serious issue of aggressive marketing practices and how manipulative language is used to entice children. Talk to us about some examples and how this marketing is harmful to our children.
You know, you aptly mentioned, for example, major sporting events, oftentimes the use of big athletes, so around things like the Soccer World Cup, we see that major football stars are being placed on big soda companies' websites and on their products. We see, for example, with the Barbie movie last year, that we now have this proliferation of cartoon characters resembling Barbie or using the actual trademark on unhealthy products. And really what this is doing is making sure that children are eating these unhealthy products. And this is not only a short-term problem, but it's a lifelong concern because children's appetites and their tastes are shifted and changed forever. So we're going to see that same child making those poor dietary choices into adulthood. And at that stage, we don't even know what it's called. It's just the child thinking, you know, I really like sugar. And then we call it taste. But it's something that was carefully manufactured from a very young age within that child.
David, you work in the early childhood development space across the country, and we know that the state of malnutrition is absolutely shocking in South Africa. Talk to us about what is really happening.
We have such an unequal society in our country that on the one hand, we have people that have far too much food to eat. And so we have a problem of obesity because there's just too much food and too much food being wasted. But on the other hand, we still have a real problem of malnutrition in the country, of undernutrition. We know that about 1,000 children a year die in hospital from severe acute malnutrition. But that's not all. Behind the deaths of another third of children who die below the age of 5, malnutrition is the problem. So we have a big problem there. That's an acute problem. It means that children are not getting enough food at all. But we also have a problem of children that are short for age, children that are what we call stunted, where they're not getting enough protein, but they are getting enough starch. They may not be getting enough micronutrients like iron that is necessary for carrying oxygen in the blood, but they are getting enough starch. And so we have this situation where children are growing up short for age, but even increasingly seen that a number of children are ending up overweight as well. So we have this strange situation of short children who are overweight. And this is obviously driven by the fact that when people go to spaza shops or go to supermarkets, the cheaper goods, the food that they can afford, are the starches, not the proteins. And that's a problem that starts in pregnancy with women who can't afford the milk, they can't afford the nutrient-dense foods, they can only afford the cheaper foods. And so it starts in pregnancy, it carries on in the first few years of life, which is exactly when children need the best food most.
In many ways, we're looking at children or families in South Africa that are stuck between a rock and a hard place. We're looking at 4 in every 10 children who live below the food poverty line in households that don't have enough money to meet the dietary needs of their children. And then on the other hand, we have many communities that are flooded with what we call ultra-processed foods, foods that are high in salt and sugar and fat, low in nutrients. And families are having to make incredibly difficult choices around what to feed their children on a very, very tight shoestring budget. And that is at the essence or the crux of the problem we're trying to address here.
Vincent, you're an industry expert. Share with us some perspectives on your side of the table.
Yeah, certain advertising does talk to the affluent, and that's where maybe the big challenge is at in terms of choice and when to choose. But I'm also seeing that there's a bigger need, and I think in advertising, unfortunately, it's not an issue that can be addressed there. Advertisers respond to budgets that's there, clients require communication to get to their market, and maybe a lot more of the conversation needs to be had there in terms of that ethical value chain. However, I guess, simply put, it's just advertising just responds to the economic spaces that are there. Yeah.
Mikateko, you're dying to respond to this before I come to you, Petronell. I mean, you work in the legal space, you work with marketing, but you also know the law.
I made a face because in terms of law, we have the food and beverage, advertising code, and then we also have the child marketing pledge that these big organizations, signed to say that, they will conduct themselves accordingly. It's voluntary, and they're not abiding by it. So even when we do have rules and codes and guidelines, they're just not doing it.
Petronell?
No, and I have to say, and Vincent, we're not going to castigate you on behalf of all food and beverage companies, but it's a cop-out to say, we're responding to the market. By that same logic, we are going to be able to openly sell cocaine. There's a reason that we have legal regulatory interventions, and I think we need to have a very serious discussion about the morality or ethics, depending on how you want to frame it, of directing any kind of marketing message to a child. Children's brains are still developing, and the ability of a child to distinguish between a fact and a promotional message, depending on the age and the individual child's development, is different. But simply put, you cannot hold a child of 8 to the same standard you will hold an adult of 25. When a big soda company tells me that I need to drink their soda because it's going to make me a good sportswoman, I know my track record, and I'm not a runner. I have the regular impulse control that we need. A young child is still developing that. And as a society, we need to create spaces for children to develop their brains without us intervening and using corporate strategies to try and co-opt them as lifelong consumers.
We recently traveled across the country, and you can now look for yourselves at this young age that this starts. Let's have a look.
So, which one do you want to eat today?
This big.
And which one has your favorite box? Hey, favorite box up. Yeah, put it on that.
12 tabs.
The color and the ads that he sees influences the purchasing a lot. In every ad that he sees, he'll say, "Mommy, come look at this. This is what I want."
What's your favorite thing you eat in the morning?
Oats.
Which one?
The blue one.
Why?
It tastes so nice.
Lezi zinto ayibonayo lapha ku-TV yizo lezi ayifakayo kwi-grocery list yethu. Ufuna lezi zinto ezinoshukela, ufuna lezi zinto colorful ones, ordinary porridge ayiphekwe ebhodweni no hayi. Cha akayithandi bandla uyangitshela naye ukuthi cha nje noma angiyifuni.
Unless it's blue, he doesn't eat at all. He would rather starve if it's not blue. Can that be considered a kind of violation of our children's rights?
Absolutely. What we're seeing is industry targeting children specifically. We've talked about the colors, we've talked about the tastes, we've talked also about the tie-ins with cartoon characters that are designed to capture children's imaginations and to tap into their dreams, their desires, their aspirations in really, really powerful ways. What's not said in those adverts is the ways in which these foods are harmful to health. It says nothing about the extra sugar, the extra sweeteners, the fat. So only part of the message is being sold or told to children. All the sweet, sugar-coated stuff. We're not telling them the truth. So in that way, we're violating children's right to information. The content of the products, their composition, violates children's rights to adequate nutrition and their rights to health. David has talked about how these foods, overconsumption of these foods that are designed to be addictive, is driving this massive, almost epidemic of overweight and obesity in South Africa. You talked about 1 in 8 children being overweight and obese. That dates back to 2016. Less than 10 years later, we're now looking at 22.6% of children who are overweight and obese. That's nearly double what it was 8 years ago.
Vincent, you were nodding in agreement with Laurie. What's your reaction to what you saw?
I think it's very problematic at the best of times. And I think when I think about it from a perspective of it is where the industry is sitting at, we do need to be a lot more cautious. And I think enforcement, if I think about alcohol, I think that's one of the areas and spaces where before an ad can air online or in any platform, it needs to be almost like authorized. But the other challenge then becomes the mediums, right? And I think it's going to be not just the advertising agencies putting up their work for approval in the organizations that are set up for children, but I think it goes to a bigger conversation with the parents. Kids are left alone with devices and whatnot. I think it's just that call for parenting as well in terms of some of the mediums that they are consuming, how much of that is regulated. So it's going to be a bigger conversation, but absolutely can get better, and it has to get better.
Petronell, I saw you in my right eye.
I think we need to be alive to the realities of a lot of South African parents. Kids, unfortunately, do have to spend large swaths of their time at ECD institutions, so early childhood development institutions like creches and at schools. And we need to start thinking about the environments where the children are, so schools, creches, parks, sporting arenas, but digital, absolutely. They did a study in New Zealand where they put body cameras on children, and within a week, children were exposed to over 5,000 brands. And the important thing about this study is that if you were a child in a lower socioeconomic setting, of the food branding that you saw, you were twice as likely to see an unhealthy product being advertised to you.
Mikateko, talk to us about child-directed marketing here in our country.
Research shows that during children's viewing hours, or hours where children are watching TV with their families, a lot of unhealthy food products are being advertised, and those include for like fast food, you know, sugar-sweetened beverages, and these industries also then make health claims, more health claims on unhealthy food than unhealthy foods.
David, final thoughts on this? You've been listening intently.
Yeah, I mean, I think we need to understand the relationship between marketing and price, and the two go together. I mean, we know that there's a reason why industry wants hyper-processed foods. They can extract profits all along the way of the manufacturing chain. So the margins, the markups that they can attain are high. So there's an incentive, there's a reason why they want to do it. And we've got to create a different sort of wave. And I think part of it is ensuring that the industry is not allowed to just willy-nilly go ahead and market in the way that they want to. But I also think we've got to find a way to start marketing the type of products that are nutritious. We need to also ensure that we have a big marketing drive in the same way that industry is doing for the foods that we know are harmful to children.
Mm-hmm. Again, we traveled the country and we spent time with adolescents. And again, let's see what their exposure to marketing is. Let's have a look.
Favorite internet yami YouTube. Ngihlezi ngibona abantwana badla ama-Kellogg's and bahlezi bangi-advertisela izinto zokuphi energy.
En sê vir my, wat eet jy in die oggende?
Pap.
Wat is soort pap?
Eet net maar yum pap.
Ek hou nie so baie van die yum nie. Ek hou nog, ek dink van net Weet-Bix is vir my lekkerder.
Mina kakhulu ngibheka i-TikTok. The ads challenge, most of the food, they are junk food. And some are snacks, biscuits.
Babona ama-noodles aba-advertise lapha in mhlambe because of bayawabona bona bacanga ukuthi amnandi, you understand, bayafuna.
Laurie, as you can see, it's relentless, but there's obviously conventions and there's rights and there's legislation, but clearly it's being ignored.
You are absolutely right. The marketing that we see in South Africa is pervasive. It's happening across a range of different platforms, as you saw so clearly in that insert, from the environments in which children live and play and learn, through to what's happening in the digital space. There's been very, very clear guidance issued by the World Health Organization globally, but we're still in the process of putting in place a legislative and regulatory framework in South Africa. At the moment, we have a voluntary code within the advertising space. It's not being sufficiently upheld and respected, but there have been significant initiatives from within government, one of which is the audio and audio-visual services, content services white paper, that has been led by the Department of Communications and Digital Technology. And that includes provisions to protect children from the marketing of foods that are harmful to health, including foods that are high in salt, sugar, and fat. So that's an incredibly positive move and step in the right direction. The other area where we have stronger regulations is in the area of infant and young child feeding. Globally, we've been concerned about the ways that the formula milk industry is targeting pregnant women and mothers, as well as health professionals, with a whole range of very powerful promotional and marketing strategies in ways that unfairly and unduly and unethically influence infant and young child feeding practices. So we, in South Africa, have set up Regulation 9991, which prevents the promotion and marketing of infant formula products. And that includes not only to mothers and the general public, but also to health professions and health professional associations. So we're trying to close down the space for industry influence. So it's important to understand when we're protecting child health that we're needing to look not just at children as a target for marketing, but also health professionals, as well as academic institutions, where we're starting to see undue conflicts of interest that are swaying the research agenda and the policy agenda in South Africa.
Do you think communities themselves recognize these kind of industry aggressive practices?
Well, I mean, when we're talking about teenagers and teenagers, I mean, we have to recognize that they are hugely brand aware. It's part of who they are. We saw also just the desire to be part of youth culture. So issues of a desire for belonging, a sense of identity that almost becomes one with brands is in fact the way that many young people today are living. And so the brands become very insidious. They become embedded in the identity of young people as well. So no, I don't think that there's sort of a sense that this is an external billboard that's somehow giving me messaging and I can decide whether or not I want to use it. On the contrary, it's just a way of life that young people have adopted. And it's become sort of just embedded in the way in which they live out their lives.
Petronell, embedded in our lives? I mean, clearly government is there and there should be legislation.
There's some good news. So we've now seen the Department of Health has published regulations, and they've gone through a public participation process for what we call regulation R337, making sure that products are clearly marked if they have a risk of being unhealthy. But an important component of that regulation is if a product does have a warning label because there's a specific ingredient that we're concerned about within the product, that product can no longer be marketed to children. And the regulation says that, but it takes it one step further and sets out a list of strategies and tactics which aligns with the World Health Organization and academic studies on this, and shows us what we deem as child-directed marketing. Chief among them being that products that do carry a warning label can no longer also have mascots, cartoon characters, or celebrities that particularly appeal to children. That, for example, the products cannot contain youth representation, so an advertisement or marketing strategy of such a product can't contain a representation of a child, and that those products don't appeal to specific senses that children are so acutely attuned to. So the example of the blue box, using specific colors and prompts and tastes and elements of children's desire will also then be prohibited. And that is a legal prohibition with a sanction attached.
Vincent, and the shift to you. You come from the industry and you have been advocating and you've been calling out industry. So what can be done?
I think, and to the conversation and what you've seen is this element of organized voices in the different value chain, right? If I think about the ban of cigarette advertising all the way to the pack, it didn't happen overnight. I'm hoping that as more regulations are less voluntarily and much more, legal and enforceable, marketers get to a space where we are thinking more value I know we talk about business with value, so it's almost like marketing with value, because obviously marketing will still proceed and happen, but it is a bigger conversation in terms of the sector can try and make sure that we are as responsible as we can, and some campaigns can do good, because as much as we influence for what is very strongly has negative, results, we can also advocate for things that are better. Just like the cigarette ban, it can happen with children's advertising being banned. The opportunity to potentially accelerate such movements, it could get us in a space where there's responsible advertising, and maybe there's also age limits in terms of maybe from 18 you can talk to them about food, but also again it's the customer at the end of the day, the parents also being educated, understand, and being part of that.
Petronell, I saw you there. Yeah.
If as a company you're engaging in ethical and legal marketing, this does not concern you, because we're really, with our 337 and with all of these initiatives that everyone here wants, we really want to curb unethical marketing practices. So if you're on the straight and narrow, you're fine. You don't have to listen to us right now. But the problem is that these companies are not on the straight and narrow. And you're talking about getting all of the value chains together. And the way in which you do that in any country in the world is through regulation. And I'm sure some people listening to this discussion is concerned. We always want to regulate everything. But the fact of the matter is, South Africa is a little bit behind the curve on this. There's been marketing restrictions specifically on food and beverages to protect children in every single continent on the world. We're seeing more than 50 countries engaging in meaningful restrictions on marketing. So what we're asking is that our government respects and protects our children as much as other countries.
Petronell, thanks for that. You've certainly given us a lot to chew on. Now, the Swiss investigative group Public Eye recently revealed how the global food company Nestlé's biscuit-flavored cereals for babies ages 6 months and older have more added sugar here in South Africa and Senegal compared to what they sell in Switzerland. Now, the WHO has called for a ban on added sugar in products for babies and young children under the age of 3. Protecting children and adolescents from unhealthy food marketing is a cost-effective way to improve their chances of living a long and healthy life. It also reduces the mounting healthcare costs associated with non-communicable diseases. The WHO unequivocally recommends regulating child-directed food marketing as a crucial step in stopping the rise in childhood obesity. Our regulation needs to prioritize the health and well-being of our children by implementing strict guidelines on food marketing practices that target them. We can help reduce the prevalence of childhood obesity and alleviate the burden it places on our healthcare system. Support the petition which encourages government to implement the front-of-pack warning label regulation as soon as possible. The regulation includes restrictions on marketing to children. Find it on HEALA.org.